Latin American society during this time period was the result of the blending of European, African, and Native American cultures. Food, family, faith, and racial identities were affected by the contacts among the people over many, many centuries. It took on a hierarchical structure, and you had four basic classes that emerged. The Peninsulares were colonists that were born in Europe, and they initially held the most powerful positions in colonial society. Then you had the Criollos, or the Creoles, and these were colonists born in the Americas of European parents. They were generally well educated and financially secure, and the Creoles would eventually become colonial leaders and organizers of colonial independence movements. The Mestizos were people of mixed European and Indian ancestry, and the Mulattoes were people of mixed European and African ancestry. The Mestizos and Mulattoes occupied the lowest political and social positions in Spanish American society. Families in the Spanish and Portuguese American colonies were patriarchal. The women were expected to devote themselves to traditional household and childbearing duties, while lower class women worked in the fields and sometimes managed small businesses. Women could control their own dowries, however, and could inherit property. So let's talk about the economy of the Atlantic world. But first we have to tell, what is the Atlantic world? The Atlantic world is described by the interaction among the four continents on both sides of the Atlantic: North America, South America, Europe, and Africa. This, of course, includes Latin America. England, France, and to a lesser extent the Netherlands, which is Holland and the Dutch, followed Spain and Portugal in establishing colonies in the Americas. All held islands in the Caribbean with sugar plantations and competed with each other in the global market. For most of this era, the English, French, and Dutch colonies along the North Atlantic coast of North America were an afterthought. One historian has called them colonial backwater. That's because they were not a big deal compared to the wealth of the metals and sugar coming out of Latin America. Now, some people did come to the original 13 colonies to try to look for gold, but they were mainly unsuccessful. The biggest economic contribution from the colonies of Upper North America, remember the Caribbean and Mexico are also considered part of North America, was fish. Cod was enormously popular among people on both sides of the Atlantic, and its presence off the coast of Massachusetts near Cape Cod made European monarchs give colonization there a try. Now, triangular trade is a term familiar that to us already probably, but what it is basically sugar, rum, and rum comes from fermented sugarcane, and cod were shipped to Europe in exchange for silver, which was shipped to Africa in exchange for slaves. Slaves were then sent to the Americas, and the reality was much more complicated than this, but triangular trade is a term that might show up on the AP exam, so you need to know what they're referring to. The growth of trade and commerce fostered the growth of capitalism, which is a system that we still use today. This is an economic system that's based on the private ownership of property and on investments with the hope of profit. So the government is not involved in capitalism, theoretically. Now, mercantilism is a very important term for you to know, and this is a nationalist form of early capitalism that had the purpose of building a wealthy and powerful state. So, for example, the Spanish drive for silver increased their wealth and prestige globally. Adam Smith wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, and he actually coined the term the mercantile system to describe the system in which nation states enrich themselves by restraining imports and encouraging exports. Basically, you want to export more than you import, you want to sell more than you buy, and that's going to make your nation stronger and more wealthy. Hold on one second. Okay. The goal of mercantilist policies was to achieve a favorable balance of trade that would bring gold and silver into the country and also maintain domestic employment, meaning that people in your country are still going to have jobs, so you're not going to have a large unemployment problem, and you're still going to bring gold and silver into the country, meaning you're growing your long-term savings. And the most important economic rationale for mercantilism in the 16th century was the growth of the nation's power relative to competitive nation states. A nation state, little sidebar, is a political unit that governs people who share a common culture and language, has definite geographic boundaries, and enjoys sovereignty. Most nation states are ruled by a monarch. Viewed in terms of mercantilist theory, the Spanish colonization of the Americas makes a great deal of sense. Silver was used to trade for silk and porcelain in Asia. It financed Spain's powerful army and bureaucracy. And in order for the Spanish to purchase Chinese goods at that time, they needed to use American silver. So